Jewish holidays. So, hide and seek, finding the Messiah in Jewish holidays. That's the subject for for today and for Thursday. And today we are dealing with spring feasts. First, let me give you some introductory comments. The Jewish interpretation is not necessarily the same with the literal exegesis of the Old Testament as we learn here at Dallas Theological Seminary. The Jewish way of interpreting Scripture, it's not just what the Bible used to say back then, but it's about what it says at the particular time we live in. So usually here at DTS we learn like exegesis, what did it mean back then. Then we go to theology of this, so the universal principle behind that, and then we see how to apply it when we talk homiletics, so when we talk preaching or teaching. So we go to the original meaning, we learn the overarching principle, and then we apply it to the modern day. In Jewish mindset, it's more holistic. So we consider immediately what it means for today. So the Jewish interpretation, it's more a development of the interpretation throughout the centuries according to the needs and circumstances of the Jewish people of that particular time. So the Messianic expectations, or how the Jewish people see the Messiah, is different from generation to generation. Not necessarily radically different, but it's like evolutionizing. So it undergoes certain development. So at the time of Moses, doing literal exegesis, did Jewish people expect the Messiah to come? No. There were different perspectives. During the time of the prophets, like even the prophet Isaiah, literal exegesis, did they expect universal end times redemption? Yes. Did they call this person the Messiah? No. Were they familiar with the concept of the Messiah as we know today, reading the New Testament at the time of Isaiah? Not necessary. So the concept of the Messiah was developed more during the Second Temple period. And it was preparing the way for Jesus to appear. And just keep in mind, Jesus, according to the Jewish view, I don't want to conflict with the departments here at DTS, besides World Missions Department. But anyway, as Jesus came, he fulfilled the prophecies of the Old Testament, but not in the way of the literal, not necessary, in the way of the literal exegesis of the Old Testament, but in the way the Jewish people interpret these prophecies in the 1st century AD. Do you see the point? Do you understand what I mean? So when we talk about the Messianic prophecies and even the Messiah in Jewish holidays, it's not necessarily the Messiah in the Passover as Jewish people were going out of Egypt. It's more about the Messiah as Jewish people expected him to be in the 1st century AD. Sometimes we are surprised to learn that something what was mentioned as the prophecy fulfilled in the New Testament does not necessarily correspond exactly to the literal exegesis of the Old Testament passage. And then it conflicts with our faith. It may even create some of believers to become skeptical and not believe that the Old Testament is to be taken seriously. But at the same time, it's not about, not first of all and not exclusively about the Old Testament literal exegesis, but more about what Matthew, as a Jew, meant in the 1st century AD. Did I confuse you enough? Anyway, it could reconcile the Old Testament department and the New Testament department, because sometimes there is a struggle, or might be. The Messiah is, as we know today, or in first century AD, the Messiah is the eschatological person or end times person who delivers and brings redemption to the Jewish people in the way they understand and need such redemption. So, in the first century AD, what Jewish people expected of the Messiah, primarily? Sorry?
Overthrow the Roman Empire?
There was one view, so one stream, to overthrow the Roman Empire, to deliver from the bondage, to give freedom, to give opportunity for godly or the proper worship as they expected the proper worship to be. Or there was another tradition, creating universal righteousness and bringing forgiveness of sin and reconciling people with God. Like, it's only two streams among several. But even now, looking at these two, was Jesus fulfilling the promises? Or the expectations, sorry, not promises, expectations? Yes and no. Yes, but not all. You see, and you see the point? So, some he fulfilled, some not yet. And that's again very typical Jewish. Yes, but. And last semester during the brown bags, I tried to teach explicitly this method of Jewish interpretation, namely, if there is an yes, there is always but. So theological discussion is not contradiction, but complement. So Jewish but is not necessarily American or Greek but. It's not like, yes, but you are not right. No, yes, but there is something else to that. So the Jewish theology in Talmud is built this way. The rabbi so-and-so said this and that. And the rabbi so-and-so responded, yes, but. Do you know where the Rabbi Jesus responded this way? The Sermon on the Mount. Do you remember? You have heard what is said to the previous generations, to the ancient. But I say to you, so-called antithesis. It's not antithesis. It's Jewish theological discussion. It's not contradiction. It's building up on what was already there. And another thing that you need to consider, it's very important, in Jewish mindset, well, let me start from the far a little bit. For us, the logic is, one thing is either true or false. We are like computers. You know, with computers, the code is 1, 0. It's made of 1 and zeros. And it's our logic, true or false, black or white. And in Asia, it's all together, like our whole life is white and black together. In Jewish mindset, it's different. In Jewish mindset, one and the same thing can be white and black at the very same time. One and the same thing can be true and false at the very same time. Sounds crazy. How to reconcile it with our mind? And there is a good word, paradox. The Jewish mindset or religious mindset lives in a paradox. Even in the time of Jesus and the apostles, we used to live in a paradox. So Jesus is 100% God, and he is 100% man. It's a contradiction. but at the same time it's true. How does God exist? 100 and 100 together. What is the word?
Hypostatic union.
Huh?
Hypostatic union.
No, it's not the word. The word is paradox. We need to let God live in a paradox, actually. And let me illustrate with another example. So salvation is by faith or by works. Struggle looks very Jewish, like salvation by faith. Yes, but there is argument against that. And then coming here, yes, but, so back and forth. So do we need faith to be saved? Yes. Is faith legitimate without works? No. So it's both and not either or. Okay, after you got this brief introduction, let's go to the holidays. Jesus, as we read in the New Testament, did everything, or the major events in his life and in the future plans are related to the major Jewish holidays. Was it a coincidence? No. It was a precise God's plan. So what we know about the Jewish holidays, the holidays that we find in the Bible, they were attached to the history back then, but they are full of the significance also for Jesus. Just imagine, Jesus died for Passover. Not a week earlier and not a week after. The Spirit of God was given during the Shavuot or the Pentecost, not a day earlier and not the day after. Precise timing. It's not a coincidence. Jesus rose on the third day, and it's a Jewish holiday of the first fruits, of bringing of the first omer to shake it before God. So, there is no coincidence. 3 holidays we are going to look at today. First is the Passover. Passover is the first Jewish holiday, and the Jewish holiday calendar begins with the Passover. Why? Because the story of the redemption, the story of the creation of the Jewish people as a nation, as the covenantal people, began with the Passover. Do you know the story of Exodus? I don't want to tell this story from the very beginning. Now, let's talk in groups, okay? So we sit at tables, and it's a very good situation. Try to keep in mind the Passover story, or the story of Exodus, and now discuss, like, let's say, 5 to 7 minutes in groups between each other, where you can find the Messiah, where can you see the Messiah in the Passover. And then just take notes, and then each table will tell where you can see the Messiah. If you don't see the Messiah in Passover, that's okay. We can learn from each other, okay? But now, just let's talk. Where can we see the Messiah in Passover? We're slowly wrapping up the table discussions. Any findings? So starting from this table. So, a volunteer.
Okay, we started with the blood of Christ, parallel with the blood of the Lamb, so that through that you have salvation, protection. We said a lot of things. Do you want all of them?
Oh, tell what you feel the most important. Don't take too long, but...
No bones broken, and then also no leftovers. So it's just the idea of sufficiency for the household. Also the date on which it happened, of course. And also we were talking about the triumphal entry of Christ being on about 4 days before the Passover. And there's that period of inspection. We bring the lamb into the house. There's the breaking of his body and the unleavened bread, the herbs of suffering to remind us of his suffering. What else did we say?
Innocent, no blemish.
Right, no blemish. Yeah.
Okay, so you see this very strong, like a Passover lamb is a strong prototype of the Messiah.
Yeah.
And you see that already, like you look at Jesus and you see the parallels. Why do you, just more or less spontaneously, or if you know, why would you say that the lamb is the prototype for the Messiah? So for example, if I never read anything about Jesus, why should I consider a lamb to be the prototype of the Messiah?
Because its blood didn't allow death to come in, to take over. It delivered from death.
Okay, so because it was giving the protection from the death, and it was the last, it was the most important key for us to go out of Egypt.
In a sense, the lamb is a substitute for the firstborn in that house.
So we could see the Messiah actually in this lamb if we expect the Messiah to let us, to be the means for us to be redeemed. So, okay, good. Next.
So we also talked obviously about the significance of the lamb. I also had brought up some of the similarity, or some of the symbology in the Passover Seder. The afikomen being, a symbol, can be seen as a symbol of the cross, it being broken, hidden, buried, and then the revealing of it being the resurrection. So see that being a prototype of the sacrifice and the resurrection of Christ.
Good. By saying that, you already jump from back then into more recent Jewish tradition that was already probably built upon belief in Jesus of some Jewish people.
Oh, okay.
So I do believe that the afikomen, this piece of matzah, came to the Jewish table because of Jesus. So the Messianic, the Jewish believers in Jesus, they introduced the Jewish community to this, because, well, otherwise it was like a dessert, but it's a substitute for the lamb. But it's a long story. I do the Passover Seders here at DTS in April. We can talk more about that, or you can watch the recording of this. But you're absolutely right. Afikomen is a representative of Jesus on Jewish table during the Passover. Okay? Anything else?
Well, our table talked about many things already mentioned. Two other things that we did mention was just the theme of the firstborn, and that seems to be an important title for Christ. The consecration of the firstborn because of the sparing blood on the doorpost, the passing over, because of the sacrifice in their behalf. One other thing that I said that's a part of the modern Seder tradition is the seat for Elijah, and how that anticipates the forerunner of Christ. I think those are the only things that have been covered.
Okay. Good.
Tina had a great thought about the blood on the doorpost and how it was like up on all the sides, and it was with the hyssop branch, which is also tied into Christ's crucifixion and the wood and that picture.
Okay, good. So you're like Aaron to Moses. Okay. So that's a good point. Keep in mind, what you're mostly doing, you look at Jesus, and you try to find Jesus in the holidays back then. That's legitimate. But try to imagine you don't know about Jesus yet. Where is the Messiah in this holiday? How could we, what parallels, what prototypes we could find in that? And you're doing great. It's not a criticizing. It's just like challenging you a little bit more.
I mean, the obvious one is Moses is the Messiah.
It's a good point.
It's really looking for a person.
It's a good point. I was waiting for that to come. Otherwise, I was already ready to bring it myself. Wait a second. Let's listen to this table first.
I thought Larry had a good point of just like the salvation aspect of it. If the Jews didn't put blood and stuff on their doors, that there was going to be punishment, harm, and kind of he had a good point of what Christ does for us, like his death and it brings judgment in a way, but also brings salvation, kind of that duality there.
Okay, good.
Did the lamb have to be unblemished, the Passover?
Well, it has to be without any damage.
Okay, so maybe Jesus can be a picture of the perfect human without any damage or without any sin?
Yes, but again, you're looking at Jesus and you're projecting him into the vessel. Legitimate, but let's go to the next level.
Yeah, I was going to say that the lamb in the Old Testament did not raise, but Jesus raised from the dead. So he is the perfect lamb.
We'll talk about that in a minute. Good, yeah.
The Passover was instituted after they had been in the desert. It was not instituted at the time that the events happened. So I think it would have something to do with the fact that it's a remembrance and that the person in charge of the remembrance is the high priest.
Good. It also matters how you take the book of Exodus. If you take it literally, as it was said back then the Passover was initiated during they were going out. Because in Exodus chapter 12, it's already said how to eat, how to celebrate, how to remember. So, but you're absolutely right, it's about remembering something. So there is a whole cycle of these Jewish holidays, and there is a meaning to all this. So we will see, by the end of our brown bag on Thursday, we will see the whole cycle, and we will see how God was dealing with the Jewish people during the time of Moses, and how he's doing with the Jewish people and with the whole world as a result in the time of the Messiah. Because we live in the Messianic times, right? Are we on the same page in that? So the fullness is still coming, but Jesus is here. He died, he was buried, he is risen, he sent his spirit, he is coming back soon. So we are already in the Messianic times. So now, it was mentioned that Moses is prototype of the Messiah. That's also a very important point. In Deuteronomy chapter 18, God is telling to the Israelites that God is going to raise the prophet like Moses. And we are to listen to him. And then it's said, the prophet with whom I speak face to face. And then later, after Moses disappeared, it's written, there was no prophet like Moses in Israel with whom God was speaking face to face. It's not directly about the Messiah yet, but we already can assume there is something coming. There is something important, completely new cycle of the events coming. Because the Messiah, we can assume, is like second Moses. Yes, he is the Lamb of God, he is the Passover Lamb, that all as well, but he's also like Moses. So he initiates the new covenantal relationship. So through Moses, God made the covenant with the people. The Messiah is going to be the new covenantal one. He is going to bring the people out of the bondage and bring them into the covenantal relationship with God. So the Passover, to find Messiah in the Passover, we go out of the slavery to serve God, to become His people, and there is somebody who is like Moses, who is to lead us out of this bondage. And there are many different things used for that. The Passover lamb, for example. We need blood, we need sacrifice. But the Passover lamb is not just a sacrifice for a sin. It's in book of Hebrews, Jesus is described as the sacrifice for sin. But in the Passover, he is a peace offering. It means it brings us into fellowship with God and with each other. Peace offering, peace sacrifice, it's community. It's communal sacrifice with God and with each other. So the meaning of the Passover is initiating a community, covenantal community with God. Think about this, but we need to proceed to the next feast. The next feast is described, if you have your Bibles with you. Look at Leviticus chapter 23, verses 10 and 11. Leviticus 23, verses 10 and 11. I read, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them, when you enter the land which I am going to give to you and reap its harvest, then you shall bring in the sheaf of the first fruits of your harvest to the priest. He shall wave the sheaf before the Lord for you to be accepted. On the day after the Shabbat, the priest shall wave it." This feast is not represented in Jewish celebratory calendar these days. It's part of the Passover season, 8 days, including the Passover and 7 days of eating matzot, unleavened bread. But still, this feast is in the Torah. And look when this feast is to appear. On the day after Shabbat. Now, Shabbat can be the 7th day, like Saturday. But it also can be a day of rest. Think of this. Passover is Shabbat, whatever day it falls on. Do you understand what I mean? So Shabbat is a break and day of no work but worshiping God and holy convocation. Doesn't matter what day it falls. If it's Passover, it's Shabbat. Now, the Jewish people were arguing with each other what is meant here. This Shabbat, HaShabbat. So, which one? Is it the Passover proper, or it's Shabbat after the Passover? The Jewish tradition finally assumed that it's Passover. So, the next day after Passover, you bring this first sheaf. It's like first fruits to the Lord. Right now, we understand, if we read the Bible and believe in Jesus, we know Jesus is risen on the first day after Shabbat. That might happen also a Passover Shabbat, depending on how we count. What I mean and what I believe the Bible means according to the Jewish, according to this calendar, Jesus was risen on that very same day as the sheaf and the first fruit was to be brought. That's why in 1 Corinthians chapter 15, the Apostle Paul writes, the Messiah is our first fruit, the first from the dead. And we are to follow his example. The 1 Corinthians was written probably due to the Passover. It's full of the Passover illustrations and symbols and prototypes. So Jesus has risen on this exactly feast. Can we see Jesus in the? Can we see the Messiah now? A little bit, just separate ourselves from thinking of Jesus. Can we see the Messiah in this feast? And if yes, why? So a couple of minutes for you to discuss. So, your turn. This table.
This is a little harder.
I don't know if we got anything.
Well, we talk about first fruits. Jesus was the first one raised from the dead, and then you have a great harvest after that. So it's talking about grain, and I think of the fields are white for harvest type of idea. These are first fruits of many.
Yes, good, legitimate. Again, yeah, you read it back, you know. What is legitimate? I mean, we believe in Jesus, so it's very legitimate, but still.
I have a question about that. Look, so how do you not read back?
It's very difficult.
Yeah.
So I'm the same way. When I read it, I immediately compare it with the New Testament, what I know about Jesus. Oh, he's there. So, and that's why I'm saying that it's legitimate. In the Bible, it's written, God says, I was telling to you these things, and after it was fulfilled, so he was prophesying, after it was fulfilled, you could believe that I said this. So the prophet is, if he's the true prophet, is determined by his words' fulfillment. So the prophecies that we see in the Bible, including even like the book of Revelation, they start making sense to us after they are fulfilled. So what you are doing actually is very legitimate. We look at the fulfillment of the prophecy and we understand, aha, it was that prophecy, that was about this. So it's absolutely legitimate. I'm just trying to raise the bar a little bit higher for all of us. But I have the same struggle. I see Jesus, and when I read the Old Testament, I see Jesus there. So, but I'm raising a little bit this bar for me, for you, a little bit higher. Let's try to assume we are like Jewish people who read the Torah.
So how do you know if something's legitimately found in the original context instead of reading something into it?
You mean
like what is how do I know that I'm not reading Christ or some New Testament idea that I already know into the Passover, or is there
I understand you. It's a big challenge. Yeah. We all do that. I mean, it's very normal, human. The same as I said, the Torah or the law at the time of Moses was completely different from the law and commandments at the time of Jesus. So it was suddenly it was reading back. Like, do you remember Jesus arguing with Pharisees about Shabbat? Was it meant by Moses at that time, as the Pharisees were claiming that to be? No way. They were reading back what they understood at their time. So we always read back to some extent. More than that, even doing the literal exegesis today, it's very difficult to avoid reading back, not just Jesus, but some of our assumption of the later time. So we deal with this challenge all the time. That's why what we need to present, what we are to present to the people is the Messiah in our contemporary understanding, to make the Messiah relevant for the people we are speaking to. You see, because the full depths of understanding we're probably going to get first later,
Yeah.
when we see him face to face. That table. Aaron? I'm just kidding. I don't. Oh, okay.
I don't know, this feast is less familiar to us, and so it's hard to put it into perspective. And it might come out heretical. So,
That's okay. What is said there stays here.
imagining that I have no idea that who Christ is or that he's anything. A celebration of first fruits is just an indication of something better to come. It's a promise. Typically, the first fruit that you harvest is not great, but you celebrate it because you know that it's coming. So I don't want to read that too much into Christ, but it's a sign that something more is to come. So maybe that is something they're looking for. The first fruit celebration is what's coming. That's going to be better for them.
Interesting point. Yeah, an interesting point. Okay, good. Next table.
I got mixed up on the festivals. We talked about Sabbath rather than.
About what?
We talked about Sabbath rather than first fruits. So.
Wow. Okay, it's also a feast.
Here, we also had a problem in locating. So where exactly this first fruit feast is? Is it the next day after Shabbat? No.
The first fruit feast? Yeah, the next. Today in Jewish tradition, it's the first day after Shabbat. After Passover, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, after Passover. And but also there was a struggle. What day is it after?
Could it be any day?
No, it's, well, here it's explicitly said after Shabbat.
And the 7 days of not eating anything but the unleavened bread, they come when?
During that, so it's like third day, let's say, or second day.
But they
And then-
start with after Passover? Or
Before, no, 7 days start after Passover. So Passover plus 7 days. And in ideal case, that was the time to start it.
So the Passover, is it celebrated only on Friday?
Wait. We need, let's talk about the Messiah, and then I'm ready for all possible questions, but there.
So in discussing first fruits, I mean, like you had already mentioned that Christ is the first fruits of the resurrection. If we're trying to like explain this feast to someone who is not who is a Jewish person who doesn't understand the messianic relationship, I mean, the only other thing I might be able to draw from it is like the ephod being a wave offering to the Lord, and the burning of it being a pleasing aroma to Him. I think that could be pointing towards that sort of the pleasure that God will have in what is offered to Him or what is raised.
Okay.
So that could either be, I don't know if that's symbolizing praise, or I don't want to do what you're saying not to do, but if that would be a picture of the ascension at all.
Ascension, probably not.
Okay.
Because He ascended much later.
Yes.
Like 40 days later, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, this thing.
In our discussion, we talked about how the Lord is providing, the land is yielding its fruits, kind of like almost like, I don't know, maybe pre-fall conditions. But it's also in verse 10, it talks about when you enter the land I'm going to give you. It's when they have come into the land that Joshua has already taken the land, and now they get to enjoy the benefits of living in the land. And we talked about like there's not worrying about enemies, and the land is giving its crop.
So it's like beginning of the best time. So it's like the best time starts. And you are thanking, you are giving praise to God for the great time that starts now. So the best time.
And they couldn't do that in the wilderness. It says when you enter the land. So you've got to have a Joshua to bring you into this. Or you need to, at least, God needs to have kept his word to have
right.
you in a good situation that you can even do this.
Right, so you go out of Egypt, and then in the land you are to celebrate the best blessing of this. So you're in the land, so you experience something of the future in their case. So Moses is speaking that, but it's an expectation of the best future. Now, excellent point. Here it's also written in the verse 11, he shall wave the sheaf before the Lord for you to be accepted, or to be pleasing to God. So acceptance, it's like if you do that, you are accepted, you are pleased, you are pleasing to God. So it's also something what is related to our acceptance. So you go out, but in order to be accepted, you got to present it. So what would be how would it be related to the Messiah? So Messiah is, and it's very difficult. So about Jesus we know he is risen, and he is the first. And the resurrection of the dead, it's the pinnacle of the things to come, right? Because just for Jesus to come back is not enough. He got to raise the dead. He got to give us the new body. So the transformation, transfiguration, and resurrection, it's actually like the first fruits of the new life in the future. So we can see Jesus in this feast really clearly in his resurrection. And it's not surprising that he was risen exactly on that very day. But to be honest with you, if I didn't know the story of Jesus, I would never guess it. So it makes sense when I know that Jesus fulfilled. And when I know Jesus, it makes perfect sense to me. And hopefully to you. Listen, we will continue. We still have one, we will continue on Thursday. We still have one holiday like Shavuot, Pentecost. We will continue with that on Thursday. Remember, the count of sheaf starts with the feast of first fruits. And it's counted till 49, and then on the 50th day, there is Pentecost or Shavuot. We're going to talk about that. The Passover season started, but never finished yet. The count up, not countdown, count up is going. So, sorry that it took a little bit late. Next time, hopefully lunch arrives on time. Bring others with you. Let's keep going. Today we were trying to get some speed. We're in the process of getting there.